It is time for Richard Dawkins to get judged. He is an eternal life blasphemer, or if you'd prefer, we could call him a deathist. That works as well. Whatever you want to call him, what he has said is absolutely shameful. Without a doubt, he is definitely not a fan of eternal life. He has made me and Tinkerbell very angry, and it's about time he gets judged. Let's begin. So, let's start off with this quote that was asked to Richard Dawkins. If science were to triumph over time, would you like to become immortal with its help? And Dawkins responded, no, I think if there's something frightening about death, it is eternity. Just imagine billions and billions and billions of years. Terribly boring. I prefer to spend eternity under a general anesthetic, and that is exactly what's going to happen. And here's a video clip where he says something very similar.
If there's something frightening about death, it's the idea of eternity. Something about everything just going on forever and ever and ever. That's a frightening thought.
Wrong!
To me, it looks like what he's saying here is that he's actually more afraid. He's more frightened about the possibility that if you die, you might somehow continue existing forever. Like some kind of afterlife or whatever, where your consciousness continues on forever. He's more frightened by that than the prospect of non-existence, eternal oblivion. Is that crazy or what? It's like he's the opposite of an eternal life fan. You know, eternal life fans are afraid of death because we're terrified of non-existence. We love life so much that we want to live forever. We're absolutely horrified of the possibility that we could, have eternal oblivion and end our life and it's all over forever. That's horrible to us. But he's actually terrified of the opposite. He would be terrified if he gets to live forever. I mean, it's hard to wrap your mind around someone who is coming from this perspective here. So when he says, I prefer to spend eternity under a general anesthetic, obviously what he's referring to there is non-existence. He'd prefer his consciousness to get snuffed out. I mean, can you believe this? Does he not love life? Does he not appreciate what life is and what everything it has to offer? The beauty of this life? And he'd prefer to have his life end and cease to exist? This is insanity.
Everything just going on forever and ever and ever. That's a frightening thought.
What could possibly be frightening about the thought of our life going on forever and ever and getting to live forever? What could possibly be frightening about that? You get to see the future. You get to have fun forever. You get to have relationships. You get to experience art, create art. You get to judge people. You get to tinker around, like a tinker fairy. You get to invent things. Isn't that exciting? Isn't that awesome? But to Richard Dawkins, that's frightening. That's a frightening prospect of having your life get to continue on. How tragically pathetic is that? Death is what's frightening. An eternity of non-existence. Your life ceasing to exist. That is what is terrifying. So he's flipping it around here, and I cannot respect someone who would prefer non-existence over the possibility of living forever. And to think, Richard Dawkins is actually some kind of respected intellectual. Yet he is this dumb. He cannot comprehend the most basic, obvious things. Like it would be good to live forever. He can't wrap his head around that. It's baffling to me. All right, but let's continue. Remember the first quote he said where he said it would be terribly boring if he got to live for billions and billions of years. He would be terribly boring. Now, this is where it gets really interesting, because here is a quote of Richard Dawkins. He said, the world is a wonderful enough place. If you're bored, you're doing something wrong. Is this are you seeing a little contradiction here, like I'm seeing? Here's the video clip where I got this quote from.
You really objected to people being bored. You should never be bored, and I think that's right. The world is a wonderful enough place. You should never be bored. If you're bored, you're doing something wrong.
So Dawkins Okay? If the world is such a wonderful enough place, then why would it be boring to live forever? By his very own words, he is the one who is doing something wrong. Because he said if you're bored, you're doing something wrong. And yet he thinks living forever would be boring. It's such a weird contradiction. I really like the quote of Richard Dawkins, where like if you're bored, you're doing something wrong. And that idea still stands with the idea of living forever. If you don't want to live forever because you get bored, then you're the one who is doing something wrong. You're the one who is thinking about this in the wrong way. You're the one who is underappreciating life and everything it has to offer if you think you'd be bored with living forever. It's really pathetic. I hate how much I use that word pathetic. I need a bigger vocabulary, but that's really a word that fits him. It fits so many people. Pathetic. It's really a great word. I like it. But anyways, let's go on to the next clip here.
We are going to die, and that makes us the lucky ones. Most people are never going to die because they're never going to be born.
Always look on the bright side of death. Do-do, 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 do-do.
So Richard Dawkins says we're lucky because we're going to die. Yeah, he really is good at deluding himself. This is his coping mechanism for death. This is the typical fox in the sour grapes. He is treating eternal life as though we're sour grapes because he doesn't think the technology or whatever is going to come in time for him to live forever. He's pretty certain that he's going to die. So now he's trying to rationalize death in any way he can so he doesn't have to feel bad about the fact that he's going to die. And he wants to spread this death acceptance onto everyone. And even worse than that, we clearly see here that Richard Dawkins is a fatalist. He has a very small mind. He's not thinking about all the possibilities. Because right here he says, we are going to die. He says that as though it were a fact. And by saying that, he's completely ignoring all the possibilities of, the possibility of indefinite life extension. The scientists who are working to cure aging right now. Doesn't mention a thing about Aubrey de Grey or these other great scientists who are actually trying to cure aging and allow us to live forever. No, he doesn't mention a word about that. He just says, we are going to die, as though that was a fact. This is a fatalistic, and he's just closed-minded. He's ignoring what could possibly happen in the very near future if we give ourselves indefinite life extension. So absurd and shameful. And I'll tell you what he's doing here. He is pretending to know something that he doesn't know. Because he's pretending to know that everyone is going to die. That we're all going to share that same fate and we're all going to end up dead. He doesn't know that. He's also contradicting his own philosophies. Dawkins, he's always talking about how important it is to doubt.
We rejoice in not knowing, not because we don't want to know, but because we've got something to work on.
Absolutely. That's why people do puzzles. It comes back to hobbies. You do a puzzle because you don't know the answer yet.
And scientists are doing puzzles trying to find out the answers to the nature of reality.
See, he said here that we rejoice in not knowing. It's like Socrates said, all we know is that we know nothing. I would argue that we do know a few things, like mathematical truths, like 1 + 1 = 2. These are things we can know, but there's not many things we can know. And we certainly can't know the future. We can't know the future and how it's going to progress. We can't know that everyone's going to die, for instance. We can't know that science isn't going to cure aging. These are things that we cannot know, yet he is stating this like it's a fact that we are all going to die. Ooh, I hate it. It really bugs me when people fail to keep their mind open to all the possibilities. What's helped me most as a philosopher, what's been the whole cornerstone of my philosophy and the way my brain works, is that I'm always staying open to all the possibilities. I'm trying to account for all the possibilities. Definitely, I don't pretend to know things I don't know. And I wish Richard Dawkins had this attitude in regards to living forever. Why does he have to say we're all going to die? He doesn't have to say that. He's being arrogant. That's an arrogant stance. Any good philosopher knows that doubt and being able to stay open to every possibility is a cornerstone of a good philosopher. You have to doubt all your premises, and you don't pretend to know things you don't know. That's what doubt is all about. But yet here he is pretending to know that death is inevitable. So he's clearly not a good philosopher. He's not thought about this enough. But let's go on. So here's a quote of Richard Dawkins I found. This is taken from the same speech where he said we all have to die. He said, "How dare we whine at our inevitable return to that prior state from which the vast majority have never stirred." So we see here that he used the word inevitable in reference to death. So he's saying, once again, death is inevitable. This is that fatalist attitude that I was talking about that we see. He's a fatalist. This is only further confirmation of that. Pretending to know something he doesn't know. He doesn't know that we're all going to die. He does not know that death is inevitable. So, really dumb to say this. And as far as like whining, how dare we not whine? How dare we accept death and, so apathetically just accept our, return to dust? That is something we should be whining about, if you want to say that. But really, we should be not whining, but fighting death. That's what's important here. Using our actions to make sure that we get to live forever. As that's what matters. Obviously, whining's not going to help us, but Richard Dawkins' attitude here, his complete fatalism and pretending to know that we're all going to die, that's not going to help anybody. Because with that attitude, how are you going to have the motivation to fight for your eternal life? How are you going to have the motivation to fight to live forever if you think that you're going to die anyways and it's inevitable? It's so stupid here. But anyways, before we go on to the next moment of Richard Dawkins being an idiot deathist, there's a few more things I want to show you, but before that, I want to show you this awesome quote about fatalism. This quote gets to the heart of Richard Dawkins' flawed thinking. The quote is, "History does not teach fatalism. There are moments when the will of a handful of free men breaks through the determinism and opens up new roads. People get the history they deserve." I love that quote because it's that attitude of the self-fulfilling prophecy. I often talk about a self-fulfilling prophecy where if you have such a fatalistic attitude, like Richard Dawkins, if you're thinking that death is inevitable, that's more likely going to be your fate. You're more likely going to die with that kind of fatalistic attitude because it's the hope of new possibilities. It's that hope of a possible future outcome. That's what motivates people to do things because they're working towards something.
It's because I've been dreaming about them my entire life. Find your humanity. Haven't any of you ever had a dream?
Do you know what this dream means?
Dreams of the mind telling stories to itself. They don't mean anything.
No. Dreams mean everything. They're the stories we tell ourselves of what could be, who we could become.
But if you think that all that lies ahead of you is death and there's nothing you can do about it, you're certainly not going to have any motivation to fight aging or to be an activist or to do anything in regards to living forever. No, fatalism is like a self-fulfilling prophecy. And that's why Richard Dawkins, what he's doing here is awful. So the last thing I wanted to comment on is this video by Richard Dawkins on the Big Think channel, The Arrogance of Immortality. What concerns me is how many likes this video has, the like to dislike ratio, and that title. This is not good. That means he's doing damage. He's doing damage to the minds of people. He's perpetuating negative attitudes towards indefinite life extension and living forever and the things I talk about on my channel. But let's see what he has to say. Okay, 100,000 people die every day from aging, and way more than that are suffering from age-related diseases. So yeah, I'm very happy that scientists are attempting to end aging. But I'm guessing Richard Dawkins is going to come up with some really lame excuses why he's not so enthralled about it.
it's easy to see why people might wish to prolong their own lives. It's a rather selfish pursuit unless you recognize and do something about the fact that birth rates are not declining, and in the world as a whole, and the population is rising rapidly. There may be more people alive today than than there are dead people, so to speak. I mean, it may be if you add up the total number of people alive and then say, how far back would you have to go in time if you integrated all dead people backwards until you reach the same number as are now alive? It would be an astonishingly long time ago. So to prolong human life in an irresponsible, profligate way would be indeed irresponsible unless you at the same time reduced birth rates. If everybody lived forever, then we'd better stop any new people being born. Otherwise, we're going to be hideously overcrowded. And it's a rather presumptuous, arrogant thing to do, some might say, to say, right, well, the present generation are the last ones to reproduce. We better all just sit here and enjoy our lives for thousands of years. We're obviously a long way away from that now, but I know there are some people who see that as a kind of ideal, and they certainly need to think seriously about what to do about population size.
Abso-fucking-lutely laughable.
The first thing I want to say is, once again, I think he's just telling himself all of these lies. He's creating a delusion for himself because he thinks the cure for aging won't come in time for him. So his stance would probably be very different if we invented these therapies tomorrow and they were available to him. I think he'd probably take these therapies in a heartbeat so he didn't have to get old and die and so he could live indefinitely. So I don't think Richard Dawkins is above delusional thinking as a form of a coping mechanism. But the next thing I want to say here is that I want to talk about, he talked about selfishness. He said that the pursuit of immortality is selfish. Well, he's pushing a pathological altruism on people. We all have a selfish, self-interested motivation to survive. This is the survival instinct.
It's funny how all living organisms are alike. When the chips are down, when the pressure is on. Every creature on the face of the earth is interested in one thing, and one thing only. Its own survival.
There's nothing wrong with that. That's natural and normal to want to survive. And if you want to call that selfish, so be it. But he's saying, look, we should sacrifice ourselves for the benefit of some future generation so there's not overpopulation. That is undervaluing your own existence, your own life, which should be your first priority, is your own existence. So some would call that selfish. I don't care. If that's what selfish is, then I'd rather be selfish than to sacrifice my life so the world's not overpopulated or whatever.
I could die. Die. Is it worth dying for?
Look, that future generation will be stuck with the same problem we have right now. They will be stuck in the circle of death, the circle of meaninglessness, because they're going to grow old and die. And what's the point of all this? What's the point of each subsequent generation growing up, hitting a wall, and then dying and going back into the earth? Nothing gets preserved. No memories get preserved. Ultimately, everything is canceled. And that's what sucks about death. I love the saying, sound and fury. It's all sound and fury signifying nothing. What's the point of it all if it ends? What's the point of our life if we have to die? And there's just no point to it. But now I want to talk about the overpopulation issue. There's so many options for overpopulation. First of all, I want to say he's not really accounting for the possibility that, for the likelihood that things are going to change as the time goes on. We're going to have much more technology that's going to help us deal with overpopulation. We're going to have much more green energy. Basically, the Earth is going to be able to sustain more people. And, there's colonization of other planets. There's that option. So that's going to make more room for people. We could just stop having children. Is that so bad? Why do we need to have children? Or we could just have simulated children inside virtual environments. I mean, there's really so many different avenues I could get into with overpopulation. It's so many people have addressed this, and it's really not as big of an issue as people are making out to be.
That's a big objection, of course, that people often say, oh dear, where will we put all the people? We have to remember, first of all, that the global population is rising more and more slowly as time goes on because the bigger countries in the world have a falling fertility rate. The average woman is having fewer children. The average woman is also having her children later. And when we don't have menopause anymore, the average woman may have their first child at the age of 100, because they're making those choices because there are other things they want to do before they do this terrible, time-consuming thing. And so, the attitudes that we will have in the distant future cannot be predicted. And I do not believe it's profitable or productive to try to base our decisions today on whether we should try to solve the problems that we have today on some speculation about how things will be in 500 years.
Plus, he's not addressing the huge problem that we have right now. 100,000 plus old people are dying every day. That's a problem that we need to fix, regardless of what potential hypothetical problems it might create. That's a huge problem, and we have an ethical, moral obligation to help these old people and so they don't die and cease to exist. That's not very nice. Plus, we have an obligation to ourselves to make sure that doesn't happen to us. So he said, prolonging human life would be irresponsible. Well, I would say it's irresponsible not to prolong human life. It's irresponsible and it's immoral to all those old people who are suffering right now. We have an obligation to cure aging. That's the moral, ethical thing to do. So I think I've said enough about Richard Dawkins here. I'm very disappointed in him. He was one of the people that got me into atheism. It was him and Christopher Hitchens, and these are the horsemen of atheism, and Sam Harris, and they're turning out to be real disappointments.
Okay, but if we are right and nothing happens after death, death therefore is not a problem. Life is the problem. Life is the problem.
When it comes to this topic of life extension and living forever, they don't get it.
Because I don't see what there is to fear in it. You're not going to know when you're dead. You're not going to know it. So there's nothing to be frightened of.
Always look on the bright side of death.
There's nothing more important in this life than living forever. That's what I want everyone to take home. That's the take-home message, is put that as your first priority and obsess about it. Really, just obsess about your own health and safety and reaching that longevity escape velocity that Aubrey de Grey talks about. This is everything. Your health, your life, your existence, your eternal life is everything. If you die, nothing mattered. Everything is meaningless if we die. Don't fool yourself like these people who pretend that their life is meaningful even if they're going to die. Don't do it. It's a lie. Don't believe the lie. We have to live forever. That's it. And we're going to make it happen. We're going to make it happen because it's too important. It's too important to us to fail. Living forever is a must. We must make it happen. That's it. Thank you, and may you live forever.